Hello, listeners. This is the What is Nerd podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Dietz. With me is Nick Grant.
Hey, man, let's talk about some movies.
Let's do it. And I'm also here with JP Cochran.
Hey, ready to talk about some nerdy stuff.
So, if you don't know yet, today's subject is the two Jim Henson fantasy 80s movies, The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. Now, if you haven't listened to the show before, first thing you need to know is we are obviously we're a podcast, but we talk about nerdy stuff, all types of nerdy stuff, including anime, video games, comic books, and of course, fantasy and science fiction. Like us on our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter at WhatIsNerd1. Also, if you haven't yet, please leave us a review on iTunes and subscribe to our show if you haven't yet. We're on all the popular podcasting apps. And finally, if you haven't yet, check out our other podcast, What is Sports? This week we're talking about a topic that is relevant to the nerd discussion, talking about competitive video gaming. So hop on over to that, check that out if you're curious about that. Okay, again, this week we're talking about Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. So neither of y'all have seen this, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
No.
Never, haven't seen these movies, but I've heard about Labyrinth, heard a lot about it, so I was excited to give these movies a go and check them out.
Yeah, I don't know if I definitely had never heard of Dark Crystal. I don't think I had ever heard of Labyrinth either.
Yeah, well, I grew up with these movies. I've seen them a million times. I pretty much have them memorized. And, so to me, these movies fall in the same category as Never-Ending Story, right? So you guys have seen that, right?
Yeah.
No, I've never seen Never-Ending Story.
JP, you've never seen Never-Ending Story?
I'd seen parts of it at one of my friend's house, and I don't know. I just remember being bored, and I remember the little guy on the big dog, and thinking, "What in the world is this stuff?"
You talking about Falcor?
Yeah, Falcor and Atreyu.
And I don't know. I just
JP, sometimes I think that you just didn't have a childhood, But okay, what about? So obviously, both of these movies are made by the Muppets creator Jim Henson. He was actually the director for both of them, and all the puppets and stuff like that in this were made by his studio, his puppet production studio. So he's also the guy who made Sesame Street. So how about Sesame Street and Muppets, JP? You like Sesame Street and Muppets?
I really didn't watch much of Sesame Street.
What is wrong with you, dude? Everybody watches Sesame Street.
I mean, maybe a little bit. I don't have that many memories of Sesame
That's crazy.
But
Do you know who the characters are, though? You got Big Bird, you got Elmo.
Big Bird, Cookie Monster.
Yeah, there you go. Bert.
Who's the vampire guy?
Forgot his name.
Oh, goodness.
What is? Okay, his name is the thing that he does. It's also associated with vampires and numbers.
Oh, Count Dracula.
The Count.
Oh, the Count. Okay.
Do you know who the two roommates are?
No, I don't know.
Oh, dude.
I guess I didn't really. But
Bert and Ernie.
Oh, Bert and Ernie.
Bert and Ernie.
I know them. I don't know their history. I know they roomed together.
Who's the red guy?
The red guy. Is that Elmo?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Well, what were we gonna say?
I was gonna say the Muppets. I did watch the Muppets.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. That's good. That's a plus.
Yeah. Miss Piggy and Kermit and all of them.
Okay. What about you, Nick?
About the Muppets?
Muppets, Sesame Street. So obviously you watched Sesame Street, right? Were you a Muppets kid?
Not really. I mean, I watched it, and I've seen some of the movies, but I wouldn't say I was like a diehard Muppets kid. I mean, I knew the characters and enjoyed watching them every now and then.
Well, what's weird for us is that because we grew up in the 90s, just really like on the edge of the 90s whenever we came into existence. And so Muppets weren't actually a TV show when we were kids, when we were like the prime age for the Muppets. they had some movies, right? So they did have Muppet Treasure Island, right?
Yeah, I watched that.
And like Muppet Christmas Carol, but Muppet Babies was on whenever we were kids, but like the actual Muppet Show was off the air before we were born. So we kind of missed the mark a little bit. I grew up with those Muppet movies, and I think whenever I was a little bit older, I went back and looked at the Muppet Show, which is interesting because it's kind of like the Muppet Show is like a kid's Saturday Night Live type thing, in that it's you learn a lot about the pop culture at the time if you watch it. So it's kind of interesting to go back and see all the cultural references in the 70s and 80s in that show. Like they had like the Star Wars cast on an episode and all that, so it's kind of fun. But anyways, before we get into the movie, because I'm going to let you guys take the driver's seat for whenever we discuss the movie, because I grew up with Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. Like I said before, I think I'm overly biased. I can't really objectively talk about these movies, so I'm really curious to see what y'all think of it. But first, I wanted to kind of talk about the history of, the cultural significance of these movies and kind of the context in which they're made. So, as I said, Jim Henson, creator of Sesame Street and the Muppets, he first started in the 50s with a puppet TV show called Sam and Friends, where none of the characters from this show carried over into Sesame Street or Muppets except for Kermit the Frog. And then you get to the 1969s, whenever Sesame Street was invented. It was just an educational program for public television. Jim Henson and his studio created the puppets for that, and the characters and all that we know and love. Now, the Muppet Show started in 1976, and it went until 81, and it's pretty much staged like a variety show, basically. Like they would sing songs, they would have sketches and all that stuff. 1979, you got the Muppet movie. Which have you guys seen any of the old Muppet movies? Because they had the Muppet movie in '79. They had the Great Muppet Caper in '81, and they had Muppets Take Manhattan in '84.
No.
Have y'all seen those?
No, I
I don't think I saw
No,
those.
I didn't.
They're good. They're actually pretty funny. I rewatched them a few weeks ago whenever we decided to do this one. But anyways, in 1980, okay, this is a big year for Jim Henson Studios, because The Empire Strikes Back came out, 1980, and there's a character called Yoda, right?
Yoda?
Yeah, Yoda.
Never heard of him.
A little green dude, and who talks like Miss Piggy, and so he was actually puppeted and voiced by Frank Oz, the guy who does Miss Piggy and a bunch of other Muppets characters. And so this is kind of the start of the time in the 80s where a lot of like special effects were done with puppetry, and I love it.
Yeah, I do too, because I mean nowadays you get all the CGI, and it's cool. It looks fake, because it is fake.
Yeah.
At least with this and with puppets and stuff, it was practical effects.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it seems more real, and they're not. I'm sure there's some green screen work being done, but it's not like they're just in a green room and we'll superimpose all the setting behind you later. Don't worry about it. But yeah, so that's what I like about these 80s movies. Is like what you're seeing is pretty much real and there for the actors.
Well, and I love watching like a old movie with a bunch of special effects, because you can wonder how they do it, right? So you can watch something and be like this, because I got a big old list of great kind of 80s special effects movies. So in because like fantasy movies were really big in the 80s, and this was like a effect of Star Wars, right? Because obviously like science fiction was around for a long time before Star Wars, but Star Wars was like more fantasy than science fiction, right? It was like completely new worlds and all that stuff. So in the 80s, you get a big boom of like movies like Conan the Barbarian and Dragon Slayer, and then of course stuff like we get with Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. And I love watching these movies and seeing like in Dragon Slayer. Have y'all seen that movie?
No.
It's like, it's not great. It's really cheesy. It's like a cheesy 80s fantasy movie, but like they had this, big old like mechanical dragon thing on screen. And sometimes it flies around, and you watch that and you're like trying to figure out how they did that. Like what's mechanical, what's a puppet, and all that. So that's part of what I like about watching movies like these.
And over the weekend I was watching Jaws. And that's just like, I was thinking to myself, this is so much better than CGI because it's animatronic. And, and I was thinking to myself, I was like, how do they do that?
Yeah.
It's just...
Well, and the cool thing, like, y'all probably heard the story about Jaws, is because they don't show the shark very much in the movie, and the reason for that is because the mechanical shark that they had didn't work right, and so they could only show it in parts, but that kind of makes the movie better, and so whenever the shark does appear, you're like, oh shit, like,
and then you have Jurassic Park, which is like a whole nother. Anyway, we can keep on going about that. So
the 80s was a big, kind of like it's like a renaissance for practical special effects, right? And so it was a perfect time for puppetry. So Jim Henson, he wasn't just interested in making children's entertainment. He wanted to kind of do something a little bit more, like he wanted to kind of take risks. He
wanted to get into puppeteer masquerades, puppet masquerades. That's what he wanted to get into.
Well, so he came up with this idea with this fantasy artist named Brian Froud for this movie that they would come to call The Dark Crystal, right, which was released in 1982. And basically, this is a fantasy world with no human characters, right? It's just puppets. It's all handcrafted, and I'm kind of gonna leave y'all there. Like, this was this was made at the height of the fantasy, kind of movie era in the 80s. People were into crazy stuff like this. Now, unfortunately, the movie was considered a commercial failure. It didn't, it made back its budget. I think it made $40 million, and the budget was $15 million, but it wasn't considered a huge success. But regardless, it's kind of become a cult classic nowadays, which is why we're covering it on the show. So, all right, so Nick, take us away, get us into The Dark Crystal. What's this movie about?
So the movie starts off, it's on some desert planet, basically, called Thra. And I like how, when it does begin, there's a narrator giving backstory on what you're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this big crystal, and one day it just broke. Like, it cracked. And when that happened, these two alien races appeared out of nowhere. You got these bad guys called the Skeksis, and they look like vultures mixed with lizard kind of people.
Yeah.
And then they use the dark crystal to steal energy and make them young and have energy for themselves. And then on the other side of the coin, you got these people called the Mystics, and they're like these weird. I don't even know what they look like. They're like, I want to call them turtles, but they're not
like
turtles.
Sloth-like, I don't know, in a way.
Yeah, they got.
Because they also look like lizards, but they're like softer, right? I think
Yeah,
like sloth
you can
is a
tell they're
good-
kinder.
Yeah, I don't know.
And they look like hippies because they all got long hair, and they're like, "Oh yes, we're so wise."
The,
And then
the part that's always tripped me out is the part at the beginning whenever they start chanting.
Oh,
and they're like, "Oh." Always.
yeah, that was fun. But it starts off and you meet your main character Jen, who's a gelfling, and it turns out that his people were killed, and he was taken under the wing of his master, who's a mystic. And
Which gelflings are like, kind of like elves, basically, right?
Yeah, they're like elf dogs.
Slash fairy, sort of. The females are fairies.
Yeah, because she's got wings, right?
Yeah. It's kind of weird. There's like all these puppets. They're cool because you can tell they're combinations of different creatures and animals, so that's their own unique thing.
Well, that's what I love about the design of this movie and the look of this movie is everything is kind of hard to describe what it looks like. Like what we were saying about the Skeksis and the Mystics, they're not exactly a combination of two different things. a pretty original designs.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, for sure.
Okay, and then I'm sorry, Jen. He thinks he's the last of the Gelflings because his parents were killed by Gartham.
Well, yeah. So the Gartham, those are like the cockroach things that the Skex, they're like the soldiers of the Skex.
I thought they looked more like crabs or lobsters. They got little pinchers.
Or like they were kind of like horseshoe crabs.
But Jin's hanging out. His master's dying, and he's. This is one thing I kind of a little bit of a problem with. I don't say a problem. I thought it was just kind of weird. His master says, "Jin, you have to go find Afra, and she'll before the three suns align, or else we're all doomed." And then he's on his deathbed. He goes, "Jin, I should have told you this years ago." And then he just dies. Like, why didn't you tell him? You know, you thrust this kid on this quest, and you could have easily told him, I don't know, maybe a decade ago to save you time. But we have 3 days, and good luck. I'm already dead.
Yeah.
Well, did he give him the? Does Jin have the crystal shard at this part?
No. He has to go to Afra, and I thought her name was Okra. Yeah, I thought her name was Okra. Like, you gotta go to Okra. But I was like, that's a weird name. But no, it's like Agra. And so he goes to Agra, and she says, "Oh yes, I've got many crystals, boy. You're a Gelfling." And he's like, "Huh?" And
yeah, I mean, what is Agra? She's well, first of all, she has one eye, and she kind of looks like a pug or something. I don't know.
Yeah, she's been around for like 1,000 years or something, because she talks about how when the crystal originally cracked and how things changed. So she's old, and she's big onto astronomy.
Okay,
yeah,
and
she's
also
got that cool model of the planets in her laboratory.
Yeah, that's right. And let's not forget that also Jin is the one. Okay, and all
chosen one. Yeah,
he's the one. Okay, so he's the one to save. Is he like the one to save the mystics, or is he the one to save the world?
So he doesn't know. That's the thing, is he doesn't understand his quest, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It's just because the mystic told him. I thought he had the crystal shard at this part. Whenever he goes to see.
No, because he gets to Okra, and then she says, "Here's a bag of crystals."
Oh yeah, he's got to
which
pick
one's
the
which.
right one.
And so he
okay.
pulls his flute out, plays a note, and then one of them resonates and turns purple, and he's like, "Oh, this must be it." And she's like, "You did it. You found the crystal."
Because he thinks he's got to stop what he thinks is the apocalypse that they call the Great Conjunction, right?
Yeah, before the three suns line up.
The stars align. But it's funny, JP, that you brought up the one, right? Because like almost every thing that we've covered on this show has a chosen one. Yeah. Like,
like the wise woman and like the chosen one.
Yeah. Well,
okay. Yeah. Screw the Matrix, because they copied everything off of these things.
Because this is a thing called. Actually, we should do an episode on this sometime. The hero's journey, right? It's like an archetype of storytelling. But it is funny that because there's always a chosen one. There's always like the hero leaves his home and goes on a journey, whether it's like a mental journey or a physical journey. And yeah, there's always like a wise helper and all that stuff. There's always like a low point towards the end. And then there's always like a reward, right? But it's funny that because we've done Star Wars, which does that. We've done Watchmen doesn't do that. Dune does that, yeah. What do we just cut? Evangelion.
In a way.
He's kind of a chosen. Shinji's kind of a chosen one-ish, right? But yeah, so it's funny though how familiar this story seems, right? And then we're going to do Labyrinth, which also does that.
Mm-hmm. And then for instance, Dietz and I were talking about just books earlier. In Ender's Game, I mean, that's the sci-fi one. He's like the one to save the world.
Yeah, that's the formula.
Yeah.
But anyway, so he's hanging out with Agra, and he gets the crystal shard, and he's got to.
At that point, the Skeksis, they say, "Hey, we think that Jin is with the Okra lady," and so they say, "Let's send out those Gartham." And so all the little horseshoe crab dudes basically go and attack Agra's home. And Jin escapes with a crystal, and they think Agra's the person they need to take, so they grab her and
and you skipped over the most terrifying scene in the movie, because whenever the old mystic dies, you get the scene where the Skeksis Emperor dies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they both die at the same time.
Ooh, what's up with that?
And it's not evident. I didn't really realize that until another one died. Two others died later.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the Skeksis are like buzzards. They're kind of like buzzards.
Yeah,
kind of. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and they're just like greedy, sleazy.
And even so, whenever the old one is dying in the bed, and all of them are surrounding him, it's very buzzard-like, right?
Yeah.
Like they're like waiting for him to die so that the next one can take over.
Yeah, and he's just like, and he's sitting there dying. He's saying, "I'm still Emperor. I'm still Emperor."
He's making like the nastiest, like
Yeah, I know. Gosh, just evil and
nasty little buggers.
golly.
Well, and then whenever he dies, he like decomposes, which that always used to frighten me as a child. I couldn't watch that part.
Yeah, like he immediately turns to dust, and then they're like, "Well, who's our ruler now?"
Like-
so they get one guy who's like, "I would like to be emperor," and you got this other guy who's like, "Nah, dude, you're a wimp." And so,
And okay, and all throughout these like there are just in these movies, The Dark Crystal and the Labyrinth, just crazy names and sounds and noises. Like the girl that we'll introduce later, the female, whatever her name.
What is
the
her
same
name?
species?
Kira.
Kira,
Yeah.
Same like species as Jen. I mean, she makes some weird sounds and like calls out in certain languages.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's just it's almost like people were smoking crack and coming up with storylines.
Well, okay, so something to point out about the Skeksis before we move on is their names, right? So did y'all see that in the credits, or did y'all see that like did you like look up the credits what they're called, the Skeksis and the Mystics? So there's the sniveling, that one's the Chamberlain, right? And so the big one, the main villain that becomes the Emperor after the trial by stone part, that guy's the general. There's also the ritual master, the gourmand, the ornamentalist, the scientist, the scroll keeper, the slave master, and the treasurer, right? Whereas the mystics, their names are the ritual guardian, the healer, the weaver, the cook, the numerologist, the herbalist, the chanter, the scribe, and the alchemist. So it's like the Skeksis are almost like more like scientific, like their titles are more
militant.
Yeah, sort of like military or like organized government and all that stuff. Whereas the mystics are more like
hippies.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's funny, right? It's because the mystics have a cook and the Skeksis have a gourmand, right? It's kind of an interesting pairing, But when does the trial by stone part happen?
After the emperor dies, that's when one of the guys goes, "I would like to be emperor," and then everybody else is like, "Nah, man, you're too weak." And so then the guy that becomes emperor says, "I'll challenge you," and they basically cut the stone in half, and the weak dude loses, and so he basically becomes an exile.
Yeah, it's kind of like a show of
Kick him out.
strength, and he gets excommunicated basically after that.
But anyways, so where were we? So Jen gets away from the Gartham whenever they invade Agra's planetarium.
And then
right?
so he leaves Agra's place, and he winds up basically in a swamp, and then that's where he meets Kira, who's another Gelfling, and then he's like, "Oh, I thought I was alone," and she goes, and Kira says, "I thought I was the last Gelfling," and then they touch hands and like see each other's memories and all this,
Yeah.
and she goes, what'd she call it, like dream sharing or something like that?
She reveals that she was raised by
Podlings.
the podlings, which are
Who was like little gnome people, basically.
yeah, and because her family was also killed by the Gartham, right?
Right.
Okay.
So Kira takes Jen back to the Podlings base, basically, and they have a party. They're hanging out, having a jolly old time. And then the Gartham come back, and they say, "We want the Gelfling." And so they like attack everybody and kidnap all the Podlings, but Jen, Kira, and the little dog thing, they escape. And then they run into Chamberlain, who was the exiled Skeksis. Is that
Yeah.
right? And so he says, "Hey, I want to help you guys out." I'm
He's
"We
like,
don't
But he
believe
said,
you."
please.
And he starts.
I was telling Dietz this before we started. Like, gosh, I cannot stand that little bird. I mean, I just wanted to pick him up and wring him by the neck. And I mean, he's a perfect villain. They did a great job of making you hate him.
Yeah.
Gosh, I wanted to just destroy this little bird.
But I mean, he was trying to help him out.
No,
said,
he
"Hey."
wasn't. He was using
thought
them
he
as a
was.
bargaining chip to get back in with his crew. Yeah.
It's all greed and
Yeah.
All right, whatever. I thought he was trying to help him out, but I guess I missed that part.
because they took him back, or like, eventually we'll see that he was using it. for
Okay,
his-
because to kind of jump forward a little bit, because he's trying to take them back to the place. He says that it's to make a truce, right, between Gelflings and Skeksis, because Skeksis are afraid of the Gelflings because there's a prophecy that says that the Gelflings will destroy the Skeksis, right? And I guess what happens is Jen and Kira, they have to go to the Dark Crystal, right, that's in the Skeksis castle, because they learn about this prophecy, and they have to reunite the crystal shard with the Dark Crystal, right? Mm-hmm. And that they learn that that's what their quest is. So they ride on these strider things. They look like guys on stilts wearing costumes, and they ride on those. They get to the castle, right? Meanwhile, the Podlings have been captured and stuff, and we learn that the Skeksis are
drinking their essence.
Yeah, sucking the souls out of them, and that's another part.
So they can stay young.
Yeah, which is weird, because you'd be like, okay, if they're sucking people's essence to stay young, why did the Emperor die? Because the whole thing is that the Emperor gets the essence of whoever they capture, right?
That's a good point.
Yeah,
But don't they worship the Dark Crystal to stay young in the first place?
Yeah, but then
But that doesn't work anymore.
I guess
for some reason.
Well, because what we learn, because the mystics start traveling to the Skeksis castle, which is kind of sad that these old wrinkly dudes get there before Jen does, and Jen like left a long time ago, you know. So all the mystics they have to journey to the castle because they prophecy, blah blah blah, whatever. They have to go there. Yeah, because we learned that for some reason, despite the fact that the Skeksis are trying to stay young, they're decaying anyways, right? And I think that that's because of the Great Conjunction, right? This is like the tipping point. This is when, you know, the stuff has to happen, right?
And so the mystics know this, and that's why they're going. Like,
yes.
So the mystics are not trying to defend, like they're trying to make everything whole.
Yes, because what we learn, because basically Jen ends up slamming, like the Great Conjunction happens, all those suns line up, and Jen slams the crystal shard into the Dark Crystal, and at that moment, the mystics arrive, and then they combine with the Skeksis to form a new being, right?
Yeah, there's like glowy light people that look nothing like lizards, birds, turtles, or anything. There's like little
like aliens,
like Christmas lights, basically.
Yeah, Christmas lights.
Yeah, and so like the first time I really realized that the Skeksis and the mystics were connected somehow was, well, I guess one of the
Chamberlain, right, gets cut on the hand.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, 'cause
and
Jim
then
was
you see the
attacking them.
mystics walking like in the desert towards the Skeksis, and then so a mystic disappears, and then the Skeksis, the bird died.
Well, because that was the scientist that got like thrown, like, because
Thrown into like a fire pit.
yeah, because Kira can summon the help of animals. So whenever they're fixing to suck Kira's soul out of her brain, she starts,
Yeah, one of those weird freaking noises they make.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, it's just like weird ass noises.
And so all the animals bust out of the cages. Which I'm like, if you're gonna make a cage, the animal shouldn't be able to get out of it, right? Yeah. The animals just had to decide to get out the cages, and they got out.
They got superhuman strength, man. They could just bust out when they heard that call of the wild.
They're like, make it stop.
They were just trying to shut her up. That's all it was.
So because they tackle the scientist dude, and he falls into the fire, and then the mystic.
He falls into Mordor.
Yeah, and then one of the mystics disappear, and then you're like, okay, they're linked, right? So the Great Conjunction is, they are. It turns out that the Skeksis and the mystics are two, like, sides of the same coin, right? It's like their personas has been split into good and evil, and so they meet and they form the original thing that they were.
Yeah, kind of like, I don't know. Do you think there are biblical undertones of this movie?
Well,
I mean, I guess you could say that, but I didn't really pick that up. But I mean, I feel like there's a lot of biblical undertones in a lot of things. If you want to
say that about anything, you could say that about Star Wars.
Well, so what do you think the biblical?
Well, like like every person, you have like your soul, which is like, I don't know, like the good part of you, and then you also have like the evil part, like the part that wants to give in to temptation, wants to.
I don't know. It's almost like reverse.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like and then you have the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder,
well,
and then but that's what people are. That's what humans are.
Yeah. Well, let's see, because I thought of like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right? Did y'all ever read the book like back in school or whatever?
I was probably supposed to, but I probably read Spartacus.
I read a little bit of it, but I don't remember. I mean, it was a long time ago.
The whole thing with that is that so Dr. Jekyll, he drinks the potion, and that splits his personality in two. Like Jekyll and Hyde, they exist in the same body, but he'll morph into Hyde and be completely evil, so that whenever he's Jekyll, he can be completely good. And that's kind of like what this reminded me of, because it's almost like the aliens or whatever they're called, wanted this, right? Like they were like, hey, let's figure out a way to separate our good and evil sides. But then they learned that was bad, right, to do in the first place.
So are they trying to say that it's necessary for us to be part bad? Like it's a good thing for us to...
It's a balance, right? Yeah. Because if you're,
It's like, I guess if you don't have that, then you won't get anything done, or like...
Yeah. Well, but I mean, because with them, like the Skeksis were like reigning terror on like everything, and it's like they let that out, right? They let that loose. But so I guess what happens is they leave, and that's it. That's it, right?
Yeah. Well, doesn't the planet kind of? The whole time the planet's pretty much a desert.
That's right. Some flowers.
And then so once they leave, things start growing, and the castle where the crystal was held was real dark. And then once the people combine, the castle turns white, and everything's peaceful, and everything's happy. We'll get a little bit into this when we discuss Labyrinth and my thoughts, but one thing I thought was lacking in Dark Crystal was a personality for Jin. I felt like he was the most bland character I've ever seen. I know he's a puppet, and I think I was kind of give part of my opinion on both of them, but I think they realized, hey, we can't really do facial expressions and go into a whole lot of character traits with these puppets, and then that's why they added
what about
the
like
humans.
Miss Piggy?
Yeah, exactly. Like the Muppets have like a ton of personality, but granted they're more like cartoonish, because these puppets kind of look like the it's like the closest thing. Well, obviously, I always thought that Jen looked like Michael Jackson, but these puppets, like the closest thing that we have for like modern comparison, I guess, is like Team America, right? They got like these really detailed faces, but they can't really move very much.
Right. I just felt like the characters were just very.
They're boring.
And there wasn't much anything to them.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just they were just bland, and I mean they told a story, but I thought it was just super dry in that regard.
Yeah, I kind of agree. Like, because I think Dark Crystal is like an amazing, like it's a very impressive movie, but it's not very fun, you know.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, but I
agree.
did like the Skeksis. Is that how you do Skeksis?
Skeksis.
Whatever. But anyway, it's just something about those things. They're just so creepy. As a kid, I would have just like been trying to sleep, just imagining these birds around my bed, like waiting for me to die or something.
Oh, and I love how I love how each one, you know, because to me all the mystics look the same, but the Skeksis, I like how there's the one that like looks like it's like Mary Antoinette or something like that. Like they got like the white makeup and the mole on the cheek, and there's like the fat one. Yeah. And like I liked how they all, you know, they have personality in their design. Yeah. I guess. Yeah.
Also like that scene where they're like sitting around eating and they're just like they're so gluttonous. Yeah. And like they're suburban and just like I don't know.
And they use their pointy fingers as like little toothpicks to pick everything up, like little kebabs.
It's like their fork was like on. It's like their fork was like a little like thimble on the end of their finger that they could.
Yeah. Just like everything they did was disgusting.
Well, yeah. So let's kind of transition to Labyrinth now. We'll talk about overall thoughts on Dark Crystal and compare it to Labyrinth. Okay, so after the Dark Crystal came out, actually, like literally the day of the premiere, legend has it, Jim Henson and what's his name, Brian Froud, the designer of the creatures and all that stuff, they started working on the next movie, Labyrinth. They kind of immediately had some ideas going for it. Now, the deal with both of these movies is Brian Froud was in charge of designing everything. Okay, he designed the world, the characters, all that, and Jim Henson's job was to build a story around it, right? Maybe not Jim Henson specifically, but the screenwriter, the people involved in production had to build a story around the ideas that Brian Froud was coming up with, right? So Labyrinth comes out a few years later in 1986. This is 4 years after Dark Crystal. And what's interesting about this one is that, of course, it's not all puppets, right? Actually, JP, you pointed out the fact that the Dark Crystal was like the first live-action movie to feature no on-screen actors, right?
Yes.
Which is really interesting. Now, the Labyrinth is a little bit more grounded. You got Jennifer Connelly, who was, I think, like 15 or 16 whenever they shot this movie.
Yeah, who's a babe. I think she's beautiful. Maybe not in the movie because she's a little girl.
Yeah.
But
no, yeah, I agree.
And then you have David Bowie, also a babe. Actually, he reminds me of the babe with the power. And so I think that for that reason, like this movie is more accessible than Dark Crystal.
I agree.
JP, you gonna take us through this one? How Labyrinth, right? You watched in the Labyrinth. What's the first thing you see?
Well, the first thing you see is a upset, whiny Jennifer Connelly.
Yeah.
She's like, I don't know. It's like she's playing Dungeons and Dragons by herself in the park. Or
she's reciting a book.
Okay, well, actually, no. The first thing you see is a horrible '80s CGI owl flying around. The opening credits, which is like I love it. I love like terrible old CGI. It's the best. But yeah, then you get Jennifer Connelly in the park, reciting lines from a story, right? And she's the worst, right? She's horrible. In this, like she's like the worst teenager in the world, I think.
Why? I mean, she's just whiny.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God, I would get so mad at her because she comes home, right? She's by herself in the park with her dog, pretending to be in a story, wearing this princess dress, and it starts raining. She runs home,
and I think she's a little too old to be acting like this. I mean, I know she's probably what 15 maybe. 14,
yeah, I think she's 15,
16. Yeah, and she's like, so she's too old for this stuff. And what's funny is the stepmom was like, "Oh, you have a date?" And it's like, okay, like date with her dog in the park. But she's like immediately just like, you don't know my life, and like storms up to her room, and I can't do anything right.
Well, it's not her
door.
mom. It's her
Her
stepmom.
stepmom.
Yeah, she's just like so dramatic.
I would, if I was that stepmom, I would be reconsidering my
Yeah, I mean,
life
I'm
choices.
surprised her parents still have hair because I'm surprised they didn't rip it out of their heads.
Well, her stepmom was just wondering where she was because, like, you're supposed to be here an
You have to
hour ago.
babysit.
Your father and I have a date. And she's like, well, leave me alone.
Yeah.
She's by herself in the park, and she's an hour late.
Yeah, and it's like about to storm maybe or something,
Yeah.
and she's just like in her own little making her little fantasy world.
Well, and then she goes upstairs to her room and closes the door and lies down on her bed. Life is so
She starts
hard.
putting on makeup, and
Yeah.
she says, "Where's my teddy bear?"
Yeah,
she has like a
yeah.
wall of teddy bears, and one's missing.
And her
so
room,
she's like,
her room is disturbing because she has like a ton of stuffed animals and like all of these like, you know, fantasy figurines and all that stuff. So like obviously she's a girl who is not she's living in the past very much. You know, holding on to
Let's
her
just say
childhood.
she's a nerd. She is a capital N-E-R-D
Yeah.
nerd.
Well, and yeah, her dog's name is Merlin, which is pretty cool. And she goes like she sees that her stuffed bear is missing, and she's like, someone has been in my room again. And she marches over to her infant brother's room. Like her infant brother walked into her room and climbed up her shelf and took her bear.
well, I think it was probably her stepmother grabbed it to calm the baby down because you want anything to calm a baby.
Which the baby threw, like that bear's on the floor too. Whenever she gets into the baby's room, so that baby don't care. Like that baby didn't want that.
Okay,
baby
and just think of like how terrible of a sister. We have this sweet little kid.
not sweet. He's crying.
Well, he's crying.
Well, he can't help it. I mean, he's a baby.
He's a baby.
You know, eventually, basically, she asks a goblin king or goblin to take away her little brother. I mean, how mean is that?
Well, I mean,
How terrible.
obviously she doesn't think that's actually going to happen.
I know, but the way she was just, she just didn't want anything to do with him, and she was just gonna leave him in the crib, crying by himself.
Well, she starts off. She says, "You want a story? I'll tell you a story. There was a young princess, and she had a babysitter brother." Like that's like how it starts. Like, what's wrong with her? And then she like does this mantra for the Goblin King to come, and she goes in her room and then notices, wait a minute, the baby stopped crying.
No,
and
okay, so I actually love that part. So like the next 5 minutes, I love this part because she goes, she's leaving Toby's room, right? Toby's the name of the baby. Which, by the way, Toby is the actual son of Brian Froud, the guy who did the designs for these creatures and stuff like that. So that's kind of cool. But and his name really is Toby. But so she goes, I wish the goblins would come and take you away right now. And then she shuts off the light, and then immediately the baby stops crying, and it's awesome, right? And so she turns around, and there's like a little something under the crib or something like that. There's these little goblin things running around that she can't see but we can see. I love this whole part. It used to scare the hell out of me as a kid.
Yeah, and then the window opens, and then in comes David Bowie
as an owl.
Yeah, yeah. He's the Goblin King. And
I love her reaction too. She's like, "Hey, you're the Goblin King." She's not like, who? What? I feel like anyone would go insane if they saw a owl come in and turn into a human
with a lot of hair,
Bowie.
with a huge head of hair.
Yeah, he looks like Tina Turner, and he does the cool crystal juggling thing. I'd love to know how to do that.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, yeah. So goblins took the baby away.
Yeah, and he says if you want the baby back, he takes her to the magic goblin kingdom land, and he goes, "You got 13 hours to solve this labyrinth and meet me in my castle, and then you can have the baby back."
Yeah,
and
a lot easier said than done because there's a lot of stuff in that labyrinth, a lot of creatures, a lot of mysteries.
So my thing, okay,
trapdoors.
Obviously, the best way to do it is to climb up a tree and just get on top of one of the walls
And just walk along.
and
the
just
wall.
walk along the. Yeah, obviously. Why didn't you do that? So basically, the story is just a series of adventures as she's trying to get to the middle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's what's interesting about this movie compared to The Dark Crystal, because The Dark Crystal is a full story, whereas I feel like The Labyrinth is a bunch of different ideas that they just kind of plugged into, different parts of it.
Well, in Labyrinth, she basically has to solve little puzzles throughout because the labyrinth constantly changes, like the environment changes, and so she's trying to work her way. There's trap doors that they fall through and go through different parts, and they don't really know where they are. And this is one thing I thought was cool. So she's journeying through the labyrinth, and there's all these different little characters there. That it's like they live there, like that's their home.
Yeah,
And so she's meeting people who are just hanging out, and who some join her on her quest. And like a Hobble, who's the big
He's like the
character.
dwarf thing.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and
Because so there's Huggle, right?
Huggle. I said Hobble, but you know,
Huggle.
same Hubble, Hobble, whatever.
So, and it's funny because they keep getting his name wrong in the movie.
Yes,
But,
so you see us playing the parts.
She calls him. She calls him Hogwarts. at one time.
Hogwarts. This is pre-Harry Potter, y'all.
Yeah, Hogwarts.
Yeah, so Huggle, he's like the little dwarf dude. She also meets Ludo, the big.
He's like a
what is
bear, like a bear ox
he?
thing.
Like an ogre.
Yeah.
Ogre thing. Yeah. He's a big fuzzy dude. He can summon rocks with his voice.
We have a worm. Remember the worm?
Oh yeah, the worms. He goes, hello.
And then we have Didymus.
Yeah, Sir Didymus, which is the awesome little fox dude that rides around on the dog, which is dog was named Ambrosius, right?
Yes.
And so yeah, these little friends join her on her quest. I guess the best way to talk about this, I think, because pretty much it's just a bunch of random scenes that happen on her way. So what were some of y'all's favorite little obstacles she had to get past?
I like one of mine was the Eternal Stink.
The Bog of Eternal Stench.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. Watching it now, it kind of struck me with how
childish.
gross. No, it's like
Well, because it's a bunch of
literally,
fart noises.
you're
Like, it's
looking
like a moat.
But like the bog of stench, you're like literally looking at like rectums, like little assholes,
Yeah,
like bubbling, like it's so gross. But
Because basically, if Hoggle, he's been threatened by Jareth.
that's the Goblin King, Jareth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Multiple times throughout this movie, that basically if he helps, if he helps Sarah, then he'll be sentenced to the eternal stench.
He goes. If she ever kisses you, I'll turn you into a prince. Oh, you will, prince of the land of stench. That's what he does.
Dude, how many times have you seen this?
Man, a couple times. No, I literally, I don't know. I've seen this movie probably as many times as I've seen Star Wars. This and The Dark Crystal. I could literally do like a one-person theater of where I just
Like
play
a
all the
one-man
characters.
show of...
Yeah.
But but what I like about just the adventures they go on, I like the set.
Yeah.
I like how everything's real.
Yeah.
It's not fake.
Yeah, no CGI. Well, there is some. Okay, so there's the part with the weird. Okay, so Nick, you didn't know this was a musical going into it.
No. And then so they're just hanging out. You hear some weird, terrible '80s music start playing, and there's David Bowie just chilling he's chilling on his throne, baby's crying.
Yeah.
And then they start singing, and David Bowie starts belting out this ballad, and you're like, where did this come
my
from?
baby crying hard as babes could cry.
That's spot on, man. I thought I was listening to David Bowie for a second. Yeah, that kind of took me by surprise, and really, there's only a few more songs after that.
But that song is catchy as hell, though, isn't it, Nick?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie.
You've been singing that.
Yeah, it's been stuck in my head ever since I watched Labyrinth. I've YouTubed that video a few times. I don't want to admit how many times I've watched it, but yeah, it's catchy. It's And like to me, I don't think it's a good song, but I can't stop listening to it.
Well, you know why? Because it's a good song.
I don't know.
And so the part that I was talking about with the CGI, or at least with green screen, was and I'll admit this part of the movie is absolutely terrible. Is the Chili Down with the Fire Gang song?
Is that like the guys that take their heads off?
Yeah, the guy.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, that part is atrocious. That part is terrible.
Well, it's like you got these like flamingo goblin things
Yeah.
who are just singing and taking their heads off, and they're just weird creeps.
And the part is pointless. Like, it is not referenced at all in the rest of the movie. Like, all that, because Huggle saves her, and then that's it. Like, that's, like, they're done. Well, no, because then that's whenever she kisses him, and then they go to the Bog of Stench, right? But still, like, that part is very strange. I guess, what were some of the other, cool obstacles? I like the one with the doors, right? Where one of them tells the truth and one of them lies.
Oh yeah, and then she falls down. That was creepy.
Oh, the helping hands? Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah, that part used to freak me out when I was a kid too.
So for those who haven't seen it, it's like a tunnel, and there's all these like green hands floating around, and they just grab Sarah,
grab her
and they make faces with the hands. And like,
which she says she chooses to go down. She falls down a hole, and they say, "Which way do you want to go?" She says, "Down." What an idiot!
Yeah,
why would you go down?
I would not say down.
Like, of course, there's going to be a dungeon down there. Why would you go down?
Well, we wouldn't have the movie if she went up.
Right.
And then they have like invisible walls, kind of, that she has to deal with. And then she's
at the beginning, whenever she walks through
And then she's marking her way with lipstick, I guess, on stones. But we have these little critters who like turn the stones around.
Mm-hmm.
And so just like everything she does,
it's not fair.
Yeah, it's not fair.
Which she says over and over and over again. Well, and what kind of I noticed whenever I was watching it this time is that I think that the point of it is that it doesn't matter what she does. It just matters that she doesn't give up, right? I think that that's what the labyrinth is. That's what the test is that it's because she's tempted like several times to stop or to give up or whatever. And I think that the whole point of it is just to see if she is, it's a test of whether or not she really wants to rescue her brother, right? My favorite part of the movie, the Goblin King gives Huggle the peach, right? Like the poisoned peach, and which he gives to Sarah, and she falls asleep. And there's that weird masquerade scene, which, by the way, like at like nerd conventions and stuff like that, they have like a Jareth's ball type thing where people wear like masquerades and they recreate that scene. And you have that song, do, 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 do. And then he's like seducing her, but then she, breaks the mirror or whatever and wakes up. And then you get the part with the garbage lady, right? This is my favorite part with the garbage lady. And she's like, she opens up this door in this garbage pile, and it's Sarah's room, right? And this part's also terrifying.
Yeah, it's pretty creepy.
Because she lays down in her bed, and she's like, "Oh, it's all a dream." And she opens the door, and the garbage lady is still there. Yeah, that's actually pretty scary, And she starts like giving her all of her stuff, like all of her material possessions, and like, "Oh, there's Charlie Bear. And I like how she starts. Because this garbage lady has all this like stuff, like these.
There's a bunch of junk just like tied down to her back.
Yeah, and she starts piling stuff onto Jennifer Connelly's back too, like she's turning her into a garbage lady. And then of course Jennifer Connelly resists and gets out of there.
She goes, "This is all junk."
Yeah.
And so she realized it's like a growing up point for her.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so that's my favorite part of the movie, though. Yeah, because she finally like learns a lesson, I guess, right? Then they're at the Goblin City, right? They fight that robot thing, and then they fight a bunch of goblins, right?
Pretty much. And then they get to the castle, and Sarah goes, Gareth was here. He must have gone this way. I must face him alone. So then she goes to this room where there's a bunch of stairs.
Yeah, the MC Escher, like the stairway painting.
Yeah, and she finds Toby, finally gets to him while Gareth is like, I've been so nice to you. And then she says something like, she recites this line that she couldn't remember from the book.
You
and
have
she
no
says,
power over me.
Yeah, which was so hard to remember, you know. And anyways, just says, no! And then she basically gets teleported back to her house. And it's all good. And Sarah says, you know what? Here, Toby, you can have Lancelot. And she has new admiration for her half-brother. And she goes in her room, puts on makeup, and her parents come home. They go, Sarah, we're home. She's like, okay. And then in her mirror, she sees Hoggle, and he's like, hey, we can still be friends. And she's like, y'all were real? Well, kind of. We're always here if you need us. And she goes, but I do need you. I always need you. And then they appear all in a room, and they all dance and party.
Well,
And
okay.
that's how the movie ends.
And with this part, I'm like, okay, so the goblins are her friends now because the goblins are there. The red flamingo bird-looking things.
Yeah, I know.
Those are her friends now too because they tried to take her head off.
Well,
in the
Hoggle
song.
was kind of her friend towards the end, mainly towards the end. When Sarah forgave him, and
it
also,
was like Ludo and Sir Didymus, right?
Yeah,
That
but
makes
yeah,
sense.
the other flamingo things, yeah.
Where's the worm at? The worm wanted to be her friend. I didn't see the worm in there at the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the Labyrinth.
But yeah, I mean, I guess the more I think about it, I do like the Labyrinth a lot more because the Labyrinth, there's a lot more personality.
Okay.
It's not as flat. I mean, I do love the little bird reptiles.
Skeksis in
Yes.
the Dark Crystal. Yeah.
But I will forever remember those. But Labyrinth, yeah, it was just more of an adventure story.
More fun.
Yeah, and like with Jen, you didn't really care what happened to him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if he would have gotten his essence sucked out, I'd been like, oh, yeah, that's okay.
He didn't lose much.
Yeah, he
anyways.
didn't lose much of an essence.
Okay, so Nick, which one did you prefer then? Dark Crystal or Labyrinth?
To be honest, I mean, I wasn't really a huge fan of either one.
Ooh, man, ouch.
Because here's why. Dark Crystal, like I said before, I felt like the characters was very bland, and I get it, they're puppets, but it was just so dry of a story, and I felt like it's something we've seen time and time again. Like you talked about the hero's arc or whatever, the hero's journey, and it's like, oh, yeah, like JP, like you just said, I didn't care about Jen. If he died, I'd be like, all right, he's dead. That's something. But I do appreciate, and I do think it was pretty fun to watch just because of how it was shot, how it was made, and the puppetry throughout that film. Mm-hmm. And it was really neat. I feel like it was night and day in the detail of the puppets between the Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. I thought there was so much more detail and character traits and personality in the puppets. Just their personalities, how they looked, and I thought there was a lot more thought in the whole world in Labyrinth, which I liked.
Yeah, the story was just more complete.
Interesting. Wait, hold on a second. So you're saying that you thought that the puppetry and the story was better in Labyrinth?
Me or JP?
Either, yeah.
Well, I think the puppetry was more well done in Labyrinth. I thought, like I said, there was more detail and the sets were there's more to them. But I feel like the story was more epic in Dark Crystal, and Labyrinth was more of a fun tale, I guess. But at the end of the day, I guess part of it, I just didn't care for Sarah at all. I thought she was too whiny.
Yeah,
and then,
she's the worst.
And then the ending too, because she's too old for the interest that she has. You know, she's very childish. She realizes she needs to grow up with a junk lady.
But now she's got a bunch of imaginary friends.
And then yeah, and they say they're in here. She sees the friends in the mirror, and they say, "We'll be here if you ever need us." And she's like, oh, okay. And a normal person would be like, oh, they'll always be with me. But then she goes, no, I need you forever.
Right.
And then she starts dancing with the people in her room. And I'm like, so it basically everything point. She says where she grows up and realizes that this is all junk. I don't need this. I need to take some responsibility. I feel like she basically gave that a middle finger at the end and said, no, let me hang out with these puppets.
Because the lesson should be that, yeah, you can grow up, but you still have your childhood, to kind of, like, if you ever want to, like, watch an episode of Power Rangers, you can.
Right.
But, like, you don't need to live in that stuff, though.
Yeah, and so
that's a good point, though.
Yeah, that kind of took me out of it, and I thought it was a fun movie overall. I mean, I don't want to say I liked it. I mean, I was like, it was okay. Again, I think the thing I really liked was the puppetry, the detail, and the sets of Labyrinth. And then the random David Bowie songs. And then, but the ending, I was just like, you basically killed her character because you turned her back into a child, which is what she was trying. The whole point was her not being so childish. And then it's like, I feel like she took one step forward and then 20 steps back. And so I was like, man, that was a wasted journey.
Okay, yeah. See, for me, like, whenever I was a kid, I preferred Labyrinth because that's a more fun movie. It's definitely more Muppety, right? It seems a lot more similar to the Muppets than the Dark Crystal. I think that now I like the Dark Crystal better because, like I said before, it tells a complete story, like an actual story. Whereas the Labyrinth is kind of you got the middle, you got the end, you got the beginning, you got the end, and then you got a bunch of random stuff in the middle, right? Like whenever we talked about it, it's kind of like just a collection of scenes and ideas, I guess. It's almost like they come up with a bunch of ideas and they kind of randomly put them in whatever order. And so it's less of a movie and more of just like a bunch of scenes, but it is a lot more fun. It has a lot more personality. So it's a tough choice. I mean, I think I like the Dark Crystal just a hair above Labyrinth.
And I think I guess you can probably get more out of Dark Crystal, I guess, as an adult because of the underlying themes and everything.
Yeah, well, and I just appreciate that it's all puppets. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And I brought up last episode that they are making they've made a Dark Crystal Netflix show, and it's coming out at the end of August, I believe August 30th, and it's a prequel to the Dark Crystal, and from what I know, it's all puppets as well. So because you would think that if they're making a Dark Crystal show or like a remake or something like that it would be CGI. But the fact that that's all puppets, I'm definitely going to watch that. It's going to be really interesting. Now, Labyrinth, obviously you got to love David Bowie in it. You got to love the personality of some of the characters and stuff. And of course, Magic Dance. You gotta love that. But
yeah, that's probably the high point of the movie.
Oh yeah,
dance, magic, dance.
We are obligated to talk about this because me and JP mentioned this before we started recording. So Nick, did you notice anything particular about David Bowie? Anything that stood out to you?
His eyebrows, his hair.
Maybe his
lower than that.
No.
Really? Okay, good. Okay. So
yeah, like for a kid's movie, I mean, it's like his thing is like right there.
Nick didn't notice
He's got like a big old bulge like right there
in his pants. You didn't notice that, Nick?
No, I can't say that I did.
All right. Well, congratulations. Right. You got through the labyrinth without noticing the
I got
Bowie
through.
bulge.
I made it through the labyrinth.
Because it's like he was wearing tights but with no underwear or something like that. Like you can straight up see his junk in those pants. But and I was telling JP like on VHS you never noticed that, and I remember whenever I watched on DVD the first time I was like, Jesus, like look at that. But didn't see that. But yeah, that's we'll end it. That's a perfect place to end on the Bowie bulge in Labyrinth.
Is it though?
So yeah, I'm glad that y'all saw it. Can I add that to your?
Will I watch it again? No, I will never watch it again.
Well, it's like it's kind of essential viewing for nerds. It's Labyrinth. Now, next episode, we are going to be talking about Star Trek, which, Nick, you've seen the movies, right?
Yeah, I've seen the majority of the original movies.
Well, and we're specifically going to be talking about the original series. And so next episode we won't talk about the movies, but we'll get to that on a future episode. So we're gonna watch 5 episodes of the original series, which I'll post on social media to announce all that. Kind of like just handpicked as being like some of the most important or best episodes. And so we'll just be talking about the original series as a whole. JP, you've never seen anything Star Trek, right?
Well, I've seen the movies that came out, or like the first.
The new ones?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, with Chris Pine.
Yeah, I
okay.
saw one of those, and then also I work in a hospital, and a lot of times my patients will have like BBC America on their TV, and I'll catch some of Star Trek. And in my mind, I'm thinking, how in the world are you watching that? Because that show looks boring, and no wonder you sleep all day. 'Cause you got Star Trek on.
Well, I guess spoiler for my feelings on Star Trek, because I never seen like any Star Trek other than the Chris Pine movies. But in preparation for covering it on the show, I watched like a bunch of the original series episodes, and I gotta say, I kind of agree that it's sort of boring.
Yeah, it just looks boring. My gosh.
I mean, it's got some good stuff, but we'll get to that then. It's got some good stuff, but it also is kind of boring. Like, I've kind of fallen asleep during a couple of episodes.
Like the only space movie or Star Wars seems just above and beyond Star Trek. I know that they're different.
They are different, yeah, but we'll get into it. But yeah, that does it for this week's episode of What is Nerd. We're going to take the week off for book talk again. Sometime in the near future, though, we're going to be covering William Gibson's Neuromancer. It's like a classic cyberpunk novel. If you haven't read it yet, it's awesome, okay? But we're going to take another week break, and we'll get to that sometime in the future. But as I said, I'll post the information for the Star Trek episode on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. So hit us up on social media. Also subscribe to our show if you haven't yet. Be sure you don't miss an episode, and write us a rating and review. And y'all, we really appreciate reviews, okay? Give us 5 stars, give us 3 stars, whatever you feel like we deserve. Write us a review, give us feedback. We want to make the show as awesome as possible. And of course, check out our sister podcast, What is Sports? Big things are happening over there. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, send us an email at winerdcast@gmail.com. But that's it for today's episode. I'm your host, Tyler Dietz. With me have been JP Cochran and Nick Grant. We'll see you guys next Friday.